The 30th of June, 1941. Lviv is in the grip of chaos as German forces occupy the city. Signs of Soviet brutality are everywhere. In prisons, they find piles of bodies killed by the Soviet secret police, the NKVD. A wave of hatred sweeps through the streets, and ordinary citizens, fueled by rumor and fear, turn violent and are looking for scapegoats. Soon they find them. Ukrainian nationalist militias and local collaborators hunt Jews in neighborhoods and homes. Men, women, and children are beaten, humiliated, and murdered. Women are stripped of their clothes and paraded before onlookers. Entire families vanish into mass graves. Streets echo with shouts and gunfire. Over the next days, major pogroms erupt, taking thousands of Jewish lives and leaving horror in their wake. The Lviv pogroms coincide with a dramatic political moment. The nationalist Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists seizes the moment of Soviet defeat to declare an independent Ukrainian state under German protection. Among the nationalistic politicians is a man who will shape policy in Eastern Europe years after his own death. His name is Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera was born on the 1st of January 1909 in the Ukrainian village of Staryi Uhryniv, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Raised in a Greek Catholic priest's family, he grew up in a period of shifting borders and rising nationalist ideas and struggles. As a young man, he joined the Ukrainian military organization and later became a prominent figure in the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the OUN, rising to lead the more radical OUN-B faction in 1940. Bandera's ideology orientated on achieving Ukrainian independence through violent struggle and the removal of non-Ukrainian citizens by force. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939, and Bandera's OUN-B chose action over negotiation. Bandera built a network of followers ready to sabotage, assassinate, and spread propaganda. In 1941, with the support from military intelligence of Nazi Germany, Bandera organized teams to infiltrate Soviet-held Ukraine following the German invasion in June 1941. These units aimed to establish local Ukrainian authorities under OUN-B control. In June 1941, when German troops entered Lviv, OUN leaders declared the creation of the Ukrainian state. The declaration of Ukrainian independence was overshadowed by the widespread persecution and murder of thousands of Jews in Lviv in the summer of 1941. This crime involved not only the native population and German units, but also groups of OUN members. In fact, the Ukrainian nationalists were the main force that started the wave of violence. When OUN-B members declared Ukrainian independence in Lviv on the 30th of June 1941, the German authorities were furious. Bandera refused to take back the declaration and was arrested, spending the next few years in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp near Berlin in Nazi Germany. Although imprisoned, Bandera maintained influence through contacts with his wife Yaroslava and loyal associates. He was well informed about events in Ukraine, including the brutal campaign that unfolded in Volhynia. From 1943, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, also known as UPA, created by OUN-B, launched a systematic campaign to cleanse the region of its Polish population. The UPA was not a separate group with different goals, but a direct military wing created and guided by OUN-B leadership. OUN-B provided the ideological doctrine, strategic direction, and operational oversight, while the UPA carried out the violent enforcement of these goals. Members of the UPA were often recruited from OUN-B circles and operated under its command structure. Bandera's writings and the ideological framework of OUN-B directly influenced these actions. The plan was to establish an ethnically homogeneous Ukrainian state, and this required removing Poles and other minorities by force, or by killing them on the spot as a warning to others. The violence in Volhynia and Eastern Galicia was extreme. Civilians were attacked in their homes, churches, and schools. Entire villages were wiped out in coordinated operations. On the 11th of July 1943, the so-called Bloody Sunday, UPA fighters attacked nearly 100 Polish settlements in one day. Villagers were deceived, promised safety, and then annihilated. Some attackers used axes and sickles, weapons of daily life turned into tools of mass murder. In many cases, victims were forced to dig their own graves. The psychological impact on survivors lasted a lifetime, with many haunted by what they had seen. These massacres followed OUN-B directives and reflected its radical nationalist ideology. Bandera's leadership had built the organizational and ideological framework that encouraged such violence. He never condemned the atrocities. On the contrary, some believe that he was one of the orchestrators of the terror which took place in Volhynia and Eastern Galicia. The brutality was systematic. It intended to terrify, destroy, and eliminate the Polish population. Estimates suggest that up to 100,000 Poles were killed, with hundreds of thousands more fleeing. The violence also targeted Jews hiding among Poles, who were executed immediately if discovered. In some cases, Ukrainian neighbors who tried to help their Polish friends were themselves murdered. At the same time, events far from the Volhynian countryside were beginning to reshape the situation for Bandera and his movement. In September 1944, Stepan Bandera was unexpectedly released from the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. His release was not the result of any change in his status or ideology, but rather a strategic decision by the Nazi regime. By autumn 1944, Germany was rapidly losing ground to the advancing Soviet forces. The Nazis, desperate for any support to stop the Red Army, began to reconsider former enemies as potential allies. Ukrainian nationalists, particularly those of the OUN-B, who remained fiercely anti-Soviet, became attractive once again. German military intelligence and high-ranking officials believed that Ukrainian nationalists could spark chaos behind Soviet lines, drawing resources and focus away from the German front. Bandera, though previously arrested for his insistence on declaring Ukrainian independence without German approval, had remained a significant symbolic and ideological leader. His release was coordinated with the hope that he would rally the fragmented nationalist movement to act against the Soviet advance. Bandera, along with other OUN-B leaders, who were also released, was expected to organize sabotage operations, re-establish underground cells, and possibly direct insurgent actions in Soviet-occupied Ukraine. Though the war situation made such ambitions largely unrealistic, the Nazis saw no better alternative than to gamble on old contacts. For Bandera, the release offered a chance to reposition himself at the head of the nationalist movement, even as Ukraine itself was falling under Soviet control once again. Bandera proposed guerrilla operations and sabotage campaigns against the Soviets, but by this time the tide of war had turned. Germany was in retreat, and Soviet control was returning. Bandera moved west, and later, after the end of the Second World War, he settled in Munich in West Germany, where he lived under the protection of Western intelligence services. The Americans considered him a valuable anti-communist asset and resisted Soviet demands for extradition. Bandera's post-war writings continued to advocate for violent struggle and glorified past actions of the OUN and UPA. In exile, Bandera directed OUN-B operations across Europe, which took place after the end of the Second World War. He published ideological tracts and maintained contact with underground units operating in the Soviet Union. He never revised his stance or acknowledged the human cost of OUN-B's methods during the Second World War. He also maintained a network of supporters across Ukraine and among the Ukrainian diaspora abroad. The KGB, the Soviet Secret Service, closely monitored his movements and influence. Soviet propaganda regularly used his past to discredit the whole idea of Ukrainian nationalism, and Bandera remained one of the most wanted enemies of the Soviet Union in the post-war period. On the 15th of October 1959, he was assassinated in Munich by a KGB agent, Bohdan Stashinsky, using a poison gas gun. Bandera died instantly. He was buried in Munich, and his family later emigrated to Canada. His grave became a pilgrimage site for some Ukrainian nationalists. Meanwhile, Soviet media reported his death as a triumph against fascism and extremism. Despite his violent legacy, Bandera became a symbol of defiance in Western Ukraine. To his supporters, he represents the uncompromising fight for Ukrainian independence. In 2010, Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko posthumously named him a hero of Ukraine, a move that sparked fierce debate and was later overturned by a Ukrainian court. Stepan Bandera's life story captures the intense struggle for identity and independence in 20th century Ukraine. For some Ukrainians, especially in the western regions, Bandera is seen not as a war criminal, but as a national hero who stood up to both Nazi and Soviet oppressors. He symbolized the dream of an independent Ukraine at a time when the country was torn between powerful foreign empires. Bandera's unwavering commitment to Ukrainian sovereignty, even in the face of imprisonment and exile, left a deep impression on those who saw national liberation as their highest goal. During Soviet rule, any form of Ukrainian nationalism was brutally suppressed, and the memory of Bandera became an underground symbol of resistance. This status only grew after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when Ukrainians revisited their history with fresh eyes and a desire to reclaim figures erased or vilified by Moscow. In recent years, particularly in response to renewed Russian aggression, Bandera's name has re-emerged in public demonstrations, seen by many as a defiant stand against foreign domination. For these supporters, Bandera's flaws are either overlooked or downplayed, and what remains is the image of a leader who never gave up the fight for his country's freedom, no matter what the cost. But this point of view is at least controversial, if not directly false. In many countries such as Poland, Israel, and also many parts of Ukraine, Bandera is remembered as a war criminal. Many people condemn his failure to denounce the ethnic cleansing and anti-Semitism of the OUN-B and UPA. Survivors and descendants of the Volhynia massacres recall the horror associated with his movement and his ideology. Stepan Bandera's ideological role in the events of Volhynia and beyond has left a lasting controversial legacy. Though he was not physically present during the massacres, his leadership and the nationalist doctrine of the OUN-B laid the foundation for the violent ethnic policies carried out by the Ukrainian Insurgent Army. Bandera never publicly condemned the atrocities, and his silence is often viewed as approval. After the war, he continued to promote the narrative of the Ukrainian liberation struggle without acknowledging the horrific crimes committed under his banner. This deliberate omission shaped his image among Ukrainian diaspora communities, especially in the West, where he became a symbol of anti-Soviet resistance. In these circles, the dark chapters of his movement's history were frequently downplayed or ignored. His influence remained strong due to his continued leadership in exile and support from elements within Western intelligence, who saw him primarily as a useful enemy of the Soviet Union. This sustained reverence helped foster a one-sided image of Bandera that persists in some regions of Ukraine, where he is honored as a national hero despite the deeply painful legacy his movement left behind.
Thanks for watching the World History channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.